Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I know from the bowels of Canada, I am coming in to this session at 3 a.m. in the morning. My name is Sean Moffett. I am co-founder and also author and hopefully co-architect behind this movement called Futureproofing we're going to talk about. And I also want to introduce my co-host, Andrea Cates. Hi, Andrea. How are you?
Super happy to be here. And in Silicon Valley, it is midnight. So it is just on the cusp between one day and the next. And I'm so happy to be here with one of my favorite parts of the world, the Middle East.
I know we're going to spend some time in the Middle East. I guess as we look back 14 months ago, this is how different tours around the world happen now. We do these digitally as opposed to where we'd really like to be, which would be traveling to all these different parts. So a hearty welcome to everybody that joins us from the Middle East. We expect a group of people live, but we also are recording this for a group of people afterward. We've had certainly over hundreds of people that have looked at future-proofing, and some of the stuff that we're talking about today will be hopefully relevant to you. And so there are, last time I checked, about 17 countries in the Middle East. And I know we've kind of gone over the last 4 weeks, Andrew, and tried to pick both chief innovation officers and CEOs and executives that are staunchly interested in Middle East. What's your perspective before we get into it on Middle East and innovation?
Well, to me, it's the birthplace of so much innovation historically, and it's also the place where today, when you look at a lot of fields, including things like cybersecurity, lots of technologies. I remember when we were working with Intel, they had a big group that we worked with in the Middle East, and all of the cool innovation was coming from there. So I think that when you're in the region, you see it from a very strong perspective in terms of optimism and potential, and certainly a deep background in science. And I think that the core technologies from the Middle East are the ones that will be fueling the next wave of innovation around the world. So I'm super excited.
I noticed something recently too, where pretty much there are either number one or number two with China in terms of both being committed innovators, I think was the terminology described. I think it might have been a BCG report, and as well just confidence in their own companies. And so we'll hopefully get into some feedback in terms of just how good companies out of the Middle East are. But it definitely seems to be that as you look at the 2020s and moving forward, a very strong region with very good both corporate innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. So, and this is our simple mission as future-proofing. We've spent the better part of the last couple decades in the change space. I think over the last 5 years, we've got much more serious about trying to define a world that is not just innovation, and it's not just more transformation. The real truth is, companies don't need that. What they need is better, bigger, bolder, and simpler futures. And so that's our mission. We're going to talk about a number of things that drop under that mission today, but really we think there's a turning of the page for the 2020s. And obviously COVID has had something to do with our reappraisal of the situation. So we have just launched something recently, and I think our future intent is to bring this type of deliverable to the Middle East as well. Andrew, you want to talk about future-proofing you?
Well, it's interesting because we didn't do this because of COVID, but boy, was it a great sense of timing that future-proofing you and COVID happened at the same time. So everybody knows that for the past year plus, we've been looking at a different world. And unfortunately, what happened is there's the future of work where people are saying, oh, we might not be going into the office, and the way that cities are working, the way that transportation's working. We did a think tank in travel. Basically, everything changed. And one of the biggest things that changed was education. I'm going to rant, having done a lot of corporate education, executive education for probably 20 years, including at Stanford University and with Dubai 2020 and all kinds of places where executive education was in that time, really brilliant people doing amazing work and doing sort of lectures 20 years ago. I mean, that was kind of the thing that was de rigueur. You know, you have to have great research, you have to have great lectures. Well, lo and behold, that's not what education is. Lo and behold, teaching and learning were two different things. You know, the way people thought they could teach was like talking. The way that people learn is by doing and experiencing, and now collaborating and going through experimentation, having great coaching. So we thought, you know, why not create our own version of this? Take absolutely the best practices from what it takes in corporate change, corporate innovation, and put it into a kind of a personal training program combined with incredible, intense, easy to digest content, and let people take part in it. So that's what we started, and we're super excited. We started the first cohort 2021, and we'll be doing a second cohort soon. And what this basically is people from cross industry working together to learn together. And then a lot of it is kind of flipped classroom, where people are doing things, being coached by Sean Moffitt and Andrea Cates and Chen-Yang Xu in this first cohort. So we're so excited because everything we're going to talk about today, we've woven into this future-proofing you. You get to be in a team and bring a team if you want to, and really feel that you have a new way, a new point of departure for innovation for startups and scale ups.
Oh, it's quite interesting. I know we, in advance of doing the training, we looked at about 18 different competing schools, and they all have their strengths, but certainly if you are a practitioner, specifically, if you are a practitioner, there's a number of things that we do in future-proofing you that candidly can't be seen anywhere else in the world. So we're happy to not only have launched this, but I think this week we crossed the threshold, I think, of suggesting that, you know, we'll probably have, you know, 4 cohorts a year of doing future-proofing you, which my hope is some of them will be based on the time situation of being in the Middle East as well. So this is who we are. Andrea Cates. We look a little bit less tired in these pictures. Andrea, what? And Andrea spent a ton of time around Silicon Valley and has the Silicon Valley hustle attitude matched with, you know, how do you build revenue in not just startup situations, which is what Silicon Valley has a lot of, but just how do you apply that same startup hustle and attitude to corporates. And had a good chunk of time at a company called Launchpad before authoring a book, and also now doing future-proofing next. I, on the other hand, came up through the corporate innovation ranks and through CMO suite and strategy officer, being independent for the last 15 years, 4-time startup, and author of a book called Wikibrands, which now we've authored our second book. So in a strange way, Andrea, the publishing world brought us together. We were both McGraw-Hill authors, and now we're both authors and architects of a different type of movement. And we want to thank the people joining us, the people that will be seeing this later. I've had a number of really interesting conversations with people from the region. You know, truly anything great in terms of initiatives. It's as much as strategy and technology are so important. I think we've come to the realization people play an integral role. We'll talk about the 66 champions in a minute, but we do have this inner core of people that are our front row of collaborators. If you're interested in what we're saying today, hopefully we can bring you into that circle as well. And Andrea, we're going to talk about a movement beyond future beyond innovation. We're going to talk about some Middle Eastern perspectives. I think we're going to ask you know, some perspective around how things are different, how things are the same in the Middle East. And then we have a number of global launches and ways to participate in our movement. So should we just get into it?
I think it's a great time to get into it. We have a great crowd, and we'll also have people who join us after the fact.
Wonderful. And so in terms of announcements, we have a book that's forthcoming. It looks great. It's 244 pages. It's wonderful. It's chock full of guaranteed you will not find this type of content anywhere else in the world. I know there are about 70,000 other innovation books out there, and sometimes people ask the question, well, why this? And I think part of it's addressed in our tagline. It's the future beyond innovation. We think it's the ideal book for practitioners that are trying to ply their trade in the 2020s. and it's visually compelling. Every single left side of the page is very visually compelling and design friendly, and every single right page explains what that is on the other side. So we're quite happy about that. Details forthcoming. We have also just launched our awards. There's a nominees session that is happening next Tuesday. We had one a week ago, and we're going to be announcing the awards at the end of June. So we would love to get some Middle Eastern companies into these, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And as well, Andrea, we've got obviously Futureproofing You that we just mentioned, really interesting corporate innovation companies, and a lot of expression of interest as well to franchise what we've done. So we're almost not sure how to deal with those approaches yet, are we, Andrea? But it's compelling, and certainly if there's an interest in the Middle East, we are all ears as well.
Well, I think that this is the theme of all of this, is that we at this stage in future-proofing are really interested in building a movement, and we're really interested in hearing from everyone. And by the way, at the end of this session, we allow people to, if you want to chat with us, so we can promote, we call it, promote you to a meeting so we can meet you. So please feel free to stay around after we finish the official webinar part of the session.
Excellent. And I know 3 other launches that we're having. We started our salons type of program in March, where we take the best of what we do and we marry it with the best of what you do, and we build a program together, and it could take on one of 8 different forms. As I mentioned, on February 25th, we kicked off our first Futureproofing 66-degree session. There is some mystique about the 66 number in terms of why we've called our group of ambassadors that, but people seem to like it. And so every month we bring in an author, hopefully that hasn't finished their book yet. And we also have a bulletin board of opportunities that we look at from our front row of ambassadors. So if you feel like you love what we're doing, please join our movement. And this is where kind of more our deeper, intimate collaborations happen. And then for me personally, I've spent the last decade doing about 25 different foresight reports and programs. We have a trend bank of about 300 trends that we track. And so we have about 6 foresight ventures that we will launch this year, and we'll get into that as well. And so, Andrea, explain this for us, because there's a lot of great schools. We don't rant about them per se, but we do feel like the time has come for something different, don't we?
It's interesting, because when we looked at when each of the movements started, and we combined strategy, innovation, and the futuring, it was incredible to realize that, I don't know about people in the group today, we would love to hear from the community. Raise your hand or get on the chat if you still use SWOT analysis in your strategy sessions. I do, especially when I work around the world, and when Sean and I work around the world. We walk into a room and, people are still using SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunities, threats. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's how a lot of strategy sessions begin. And when we looked at it, it started in 1969. So that's incredible. Certainly the times have changed for sure in business since 1969. And let's look at a lot of things: stage, gate, and waterfall, which, very, very important, especially in a kind of manufacturing mindset or a production mindset. 5 forces, the Michael Porter work. 6 Sigma, when I remember when the United States automotive companies, I was working with General Motors at the time, and the Japanese car companies were kind of eating our lunch. It was incredible to look way across the Pacific Ocean and say, we thought that the American car companies were king, and here we've got this processes from Japan that are much more efficient. We've got to figure out what to do and catch up. And so we went to 6 Sigma, and we embraced that and realized that we had to become efficient, and looked at benchmarking. Of course, when I was in business school, we're almost at my era, but you had to benchmark. I mean, the whole idea, and I made a living for probably 15 years as a consultant with large companies. And, the very first thing you did for Royal Dutch Shell, you have to benchmark against BP, no question. So that's changed because, for instance, with benchmarking, we're pretty likely to be competing against somebody from outside our industry. If we're in a car company nowadays, we're probably going to be competing with somebody that 5 years ago didn't exist. I remember when Tesla came on the scene, or with smaller people, smaller companies that are providing, like we talked about in the Middle East, some autonomous vehicle, location, LiDAR, AI, those kinds of companies are part of the mobility for autonomous vehicles and other innovations. So if you're just benchmarking against other car companies, you're not going to get ahead. You're not going to be far enough ahead fast enough. Design thinking, same thing. You know, we've collaborated with IDEO for years and done design thinking sprints and been involved in projects that were very strong in design thinking. And, you know, it's not intended to solve every problem. It's not intended to look at the future in the ways that you need to and be fast enough in terms of the trends to really do deep dives into technology. It's intended to look at empathy. It's intended to do some really important customer-centric initiatives, but it's not intended to necessarily scale everything in a corporate level and be commercially successful. So same thing with Agile. You know, I ran a software company for 4 years in Silicon Valley. And boy, we needed to know our Agile really well to get our software out the door and to have iterations of the software going out to market fast enough and to be able to ship. And then open innovation, you know, we collaborate with Henry Chesbrough, who wrote the book on open innovation. And Sean and I have both been leaders in open innovation for probably 20 years now. And that was originally to solve the problem of what's the next problem? What's the next idea? How do we get more minds to circle around these ideas so that we get new thinking? The problem today isn't that we don't have enough great ideas. I mean, that's a different problem to solve. And so times have changed. We have so many ideas. So many people know design thinking and innovation and open innovation that's not our problem. We also look at things like blue ocean strategy. Love it, love it, love it. One of the key case studies was Cirque du Soleil, which is a Canadian alternative to the circus. And they were the bee's knees, you know, in the year 2000 plus, they were this alternative circus and it was this amazing new model. Well, unfortunately in COVID, guess who went bankrupt? Cirque du Soleil. And so the ability to invent something that's cool is very different from the ability to be resilient. And unfortunately, I hope that they do well because big fan of theirs, but you know, they didn't catch up fast enough. Lean startup, you know, the software company I ran was co-founded by the grandfather of the lean startup movement and it looks like, gosh, that all started in the early 2010s. And when I ran the company, it was 2013 to 2017. And, you know, it was definitely the latest and greatest, especially in Silicon Valley. But not everything is a software problem. Not everything is a platform problem. And not everything is about experimenting on a small scale. What we noticed is that, you know, those small scale experiments didn't necessarily get large, didn't necessarily go to scale. And so once again, the next piece was blitz scaling. You know, how do you achieve escape velocity? So these are all strong initiatives, great disciplines, but we believe that what we're going to talk about today is even better because guess what? It's designed for the 2020s.
And I know we've never mentioned this, but there's a level of insanity here. I know we sometimes are complimentary of the past, but when you think about what is the most frequently practiced tool within the innovation and strategy space, it is SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis is now 53 years old. If we applied that same thinking to technology, we would still be using some kind of Fortran or COBOL language, some primitive language, or if it was music, we would have already gone through about 5 or 6 distinct different eras of music before we got back to, you know, whatever was on your probably 8-track in 1969. So just using that as a metaphor, it is insane that we haven't updated kind of our tools for the age. So I thought we might encourage the people that are online live, and certainly if you see this on YouTube after the fact, you can certainly comment in our space. But I'm just very curious in terms of, we're certainly not, don't propose to be experts in the Middle East. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities when it comes to Middle East innovation? I know the face of innovation from outside appearances would seem to be quite different. This is no longer just oil and gas exploration. This is a much more nuanced and sophisticated marketplace in terms of applying innovation. So we'd encourage, if you're, and unfortunately when I run these things, Andrea, it's very tough to see the chat. So if you can
Yeah, so I just put this in the chat. And one of the things that struck me, we always talk about constraints being a great inspiration for innovation. And when I first started working in the Middle East, it was maybe about, I don't know, 15 years ago. And one of the constraints was the weather, because we had a very arid area where my client was working. It was an agriculture project. And the constraint of the weather is not something you can just innovate around in the beginning. It is what it is. You can't say, oh, let's change the weather. Well, I mean, I guess you can change the weather, but the ability for people to take some givens and innovate around them was super interesting to me. The other part of it, I did a project that was based on a lot of really brilliant and advanced military defense core technologies. And those military defense core technologies in the Middle East project, not unlike what happens in the United States, where DARPA was, bringing out some great innovation ahead of the curve that was then transferable to many commercial settings, to startups that were, fueled after people got out of the military. So that was another constraint that I found really inspiring. And I worked in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago with a conglomerate that had restaurants and biotech and agriculture and, dairies and that. And it was incredible what happens when you have partnering relationships and supply chain that are across multiple industries. And I was, and I remember working in Dubai, also looking at how fast things change, how global, how interdisciplinary things were, just because young talent was coming from all over. So in every single situation where I've worked recently in the Middle East, it's very strikingly different from the way it feels in Latin America, in the Nordics, in certainly North America. Sean, what about you?
Yeah, my experience is somewhat similar. I mean, it is this interesting mix of both tradition and ambitious confidence moving forward, isn't it? Having worked with, some of the ministries in some of the Middle Eastern governments, it can feel traditional at times, but there's this strident kind of thought that, we will outpace the rest of the world on whatever we're working on. So I agree with your point about it's like no other region in the world in terms of just the business culture and how people go about what they do.
So we'd love for people to write in the chat from your perspective, since you live in the Middle East and you represent really interesting countries and parts of the region. If you're able to write in the chat, just one idea, what's a challenge? We call it the soapbox, so that you can inform us and share your ideas about challenges and opportunities that you think are really happening today in the Middle East. And I think the second thing Sean and I are super interested in is, how has COVID affected everybody?
Yeah,
we look with envy at Israel for the vaccination. I don't know to what extent that's true on the ground, but that's what we hear about as kind of a benchmark, that the vaccination, some clients that we work with in Israel now have been fully vaccinated for months, have an electronic sort of passport, and we are far below that here in the United States. So we feel like we're behind a lot in the region. I'm reading something from the chat. Oh, interesting, racist issues in UAE. And I won't say who that is, because sometimes people like to speak anonymously, but we would really like to be realistic about this as well, to be fair. As a woman who's worked in Saudi Arabia, that's a really interesting experience to have a kind of fresh set of eyes around assumptions for women in the workplace. And I remember being naive when I first worked there. I guess it was about 6 years ago. And I sort of innocently said, how many women employees do you have in this company? And they said 0. That was new for me. It was just a real, I just didn't understand exactly what it was like to be working there. And I've also been equally impressed with some open-mindedness, especially around the need for change. And so I believe that we can learn a lot from the people here, and would love to talk more about it. And please put some more issues in the chat, because we want to learn. there's another piece in the chat that talks about how energetic we are. Yeah, exactly. It's midnight.
We're
Yeah,
bringing it.
three
We're
o'clock,
bringing
3 o'clock for Sean. Okay, so interesting. So there's a comment about mindset. And, the idea is that you focus on data, you see that the next trend is swinging back and moving to process, and you kind of go back and forth, the pendulum swings. And I think that that's a really astute observation about the march through time of some of these approaches. So what we talk about, and I think that this is great because the notion is how to cook with a mix of ingredients that meet our appetite and the taste for the guests, meaning our customers. So I think that this is interesting because this is what we also noticed, is that if you have a point of departure that has a mindset that a large company is like a small company on steroids, you're going to miss the boat. I used to, actually, speaking of boats, I used to say a large ship is not necessarily a lot of wave runners or, jet skis kind of tied together. It's very different. And so that's the other point of departure that Sean and I take, which is basically we love large companies. We love when things go to scale. And that's coming from running startups, right? So we understand that they're different, but we also think that ideas that are so damn good that they are good enough for, to get a startup through to, a certain size, a lot of them should be scaled. And so we've tackled that. And that wasn't the problem that was trying to be solved with, say, design thinking. It might be an individual project that was the determination of success.
Wonderful. We're going to keep moving here. Just, we do have a book that's coming out shortly, and we do have 12 simple reasons. I'll fly through some of these. Just, as mentioned, it is a foundational pillar for nearly everything that we're doing, both training, our research, nearly everything. So it is kind of one of our linchpins. This is a little bit of what it looks like. And I think it's equal parts a manifesto. We don't rant necessarily, but we do, raise our cackles a little bit in terms of how innovation currently gets practiced and provide some provocation. It's a field guide. We know what works. We've interviewed the people. We have done the research. We have done a piece of research called the Corporate Innovation Playbook and interviewed enlightened innovators around the world, tried to find what they did, and it's been reflected in the book. It's a playbook. We have upwards to 70 different canvases, tools, and landscapes. And we're going to talk about an overall approach here in a minute that just, sometimes, and I'm not too sure if people that have joined us have worked on anything in publishing or any things that have been major. Sometimes it takes so long to come up with something very simple. And so we've come up with a four-step heuristic in terms of just what we are all about. And then finally, we're a resource bank. We want to genuinely help innovators get to next. And so we provide role models and case studies and a whole bunch of different resources, one of which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. I think it reflects a significantly changed world. If you look at, I'll summarize some of the change here. I mean, COVID is one thing altogether. Digital transformation has kind of almost 10 times itself over the last 14 months based on just a constraint that has been loosened. Like, we cannot meet physically. But even before that, when we did our corporate innovation playbook, the actual speed of innovation, speed at which companies are practicing innovation over the last 10 years has changed. We're about 2.6 times faster as companies trying to get stuff out, which is normally great, except for the fact that everybody else has changed 4.2 times as fast. And so we're just falling a little bit behind the world. We also have these 30 different levers that we pull. This is our universe. And I won't go into all of them, but I find it somewhat comical at times. And I will take a bit of a piece out of some of our peer set where all they do is talk about design thinking, or all they do is talk about how leadership will change, or all they do is talk about customer experience. And those are great things. But if you are an innovator, it is truly a generalist trade. You need to be really conversant and literate on a whole bunch of things, and hopefully fluent on a lot of things to get to next. And so we also talk about 6 types of intelligence in our book. It certainly functions very prominently in our fourth chapter, which talks about seeing behind and beyond your four walls and looking out into the future and beyond. We also have many, many new frameworks. This is one of them. I mean, it's funny how, Andrea, we almost give it short shrift. We don't focus a lot on this, and yet this is truly breakthrough in terms of just how we see the world of innovation and how you can categorize it. Most categories have like, you're an ambidextrous organization and it's got these two sides, or you're Clayton Christensen's four types of innovation, but we've classified 5 different levels and 6 different layers of innovation, which we think for somebody that's a practitioner, it's really important to get the nuance behind it. And then finally, we have canvases and tools. We have 18 canvases, 36 tools. They all are put in place for practitioners to help get their executive teams aligned, help get their operating teams to focus on whatever the topic is at hand, and hopefully create some breakthroughs in terms of just the actual challenges themselves. We do a ton of future of type of work, both in terms of industries. We've looked at 30 different industries, 30 different change functions. So a lot of different understanding what the landscapes are at play. Andrea, you want to speak to some of the case studies that we've looked at?
Well, we've created a 4-beat case study. The reason is that everybody needs to be able to understand the focus of what they've done. So what they focus on, what they thought, what they learned, what they did differently, and the impact that it had. And so in each of these, I'll take General Motors, for example. You know, that's an example where we started off in the old days. It was with OnStar, which was an old technology. And what do you do when there's something, a technology that's revolutionary at the time is suddenly kind of mothballed? It's just not relevant anymore because others have come in to take over. I'll use another example of, you know, we've worked with Siemens, we've worked with Mayo Clinic, we've worked with Texas Medical Center, we've worked with Dubai 2020, as we mentioned, we've worked with this conglomerate group in the Middle East, we've worked with a wind company, and in each situation, there's a technology usually somewhere in the mix. There is a business model that can be incredibly innovative. When we work with Allstate, it was at the time that they thought, oh, maybe we should digitize the insurance industry. And you could tell that the internal team would be challenged to fully embrace the capability. And so we ended up working with a startup and ultimately acquiring one. And so we've worked with really large companies across the board. We've done a lot of work in Japan. We did a big project for Ford in China. And in every single case, it started off with what they thought, bringing in an outside perspective, being able to, as Sean said, it's not just ambidextrous. You know, people talk about having to explore while they're exploiting. That's a typical duality. But what we found is that that's not really describing what's happening. We know that there's one force that every company, you know, whether it's a Siemens, a Unilever, a Moen, a General Motors, today, people have to have a purpose. I mean, that's a very important part. You can't just have a North Star based on core competencies. That's an old model. And so these case studies are around people seeing a new potential, a new future, and being able to really embrace them. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that we saw last year, we ran a think tank for the travel industry, and it was a devastated industry. And yet what we were able to do is to gather people from multiple industries within travel and others, acknowledge that there were new safety and health issues that needed to be immediately woven into the fabric of travel. No one was going to travel if they didn't feel safe and if they didn't have a comfort level with protection from COVID. So that awareness is very different from being inside a company saying, how can we remove the middle seat? You know, we're an airline. How can we remove the middle seat? So this has to be really, this really has to be much more simple, you know, and what we say is we have to see, we have to learn, we have to decide what to do, and we have to commit. So it's in each of these cases, what did people see? what did they learn, what did they decide, and what did they commit? And so what we're hoping is that we'll equip you as the community with this mindset and with these simple tools so that you can start making much, really great strides. Take your vision and translate it into what can have an impact for the way that you see the world changing.
Is one of the craziest questions I get, and I understand why people ask it. I'm a former marketer. They go, well, what target industry is future proofing best for? And I find it one of the more challenging questions, Andrea, just because I can't even imagine an industry that couldn't use the see, learn, decide, commit process. It would completely befuddle me to find an industry, and we're talking about sometimes some boring industries, or at least from an outside appearance, boring industries. Some of those industries are probably custom made for what we're doing here. So
well, and so we just got some great feedback that we're presenting a lot. It's a little bit maybe overwhelming. That's some feedback, and so the notion is, can we explain simply that we're sharing this overview to show that there isn't a challenge that isn't included, but you certainly don't need to learn every single thing that we're presenting to make great progress. You only use a couple of tools. It's kind of like going to the doctor. We do what we call triage, right? So you come in and we are experts at helping you figure out which 2 or 3 tools will hit the mark for you. So we help equip you. We kind of pick the right cards from our deck, and then you don't have to know everything that we're going over. So I think that's really good feedback that we're being a little bit overwhelming. We help you develop a quick win so that you can get a lot of credibility from understanding that you saw things in a new way, and that helped equip you. You might have thought, for instance, that you're running a windmill company and you think that it's about optimization of a single windmill. So once we say, well, have you thought about a business model where you're looking at wind farms instead of windmills? And that mindset gives you something different to think about. You're solving a different problem simply. And what you do there is you look at the wind farm issue, start to talk to people who understand remote management of a wind farm, and you're able to then have a simple solution that has a lot more leverage. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 simple process. But the biggest thing is that don't get overwhelmed. I mean, we help you figure out which couple of tools you're going to use. So when you see all of this data and all of these examples, don't worry. We make it simple for you, so that you come to us with the vision of your next. What do you want to do next? And then we say, well, based on that, here are the 2 powerful tools to get you started.
yeah, and I think that's fair feedback as well. I think part of just the purpose of today's discussion is certainly we're revealing a new argument, which certainly has some newness to it. But I think it's our overture to actually start some conversations with people in the region. We want to make this a global movement. And so by joining us today or joining us online later, my hope is you see it, you connect with us. We're going to provide a number of different flange points to get in touch with us as well. And so certainly just the last couple of things in terms of what the book's all about, I can count probably about 8 or 9 different coverage areas that we cover very differently in our book. One thing here, if you look at the bulk of books, and I ask you, look for the 10 books that are on your bookshelf and look up in the index, scaling innovation. And for the most part, it won't be there. And so we talk about scale a lot from a sales and business development standpoint, but very few people talk about what actually happens to that bright, shiny thing once it actually makes it into the marketplace. And your responsibility for it does not give up once you've actually launched this thing. So a lot of different numbers, but it just goes to the notion of we really have tried to provide the wealth of end-to-end resources that any practitioner that's out there uses. We've had some great feedback from our training course where it's just like, Oh my Lord, it's great. Like, and we actually go in and actually simplify things for them in the course, but it's great that they can walk away and have this roster of resources at their availability. And I'm not too sure if Goldilocks and the Three Bears plays as well in the Middle East as it does here in North America, but it's an old kind of fairy tale nursery rhyme where kind of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, it's like, my porridge is too hot, my porridge is too cold, and my porridge is just right. And we like to say that for our stuff, our porridge is really good. We find sometimes some innovators are either way too incremental and not focused on enough ambition, or on the other side, work on things that are way too far in the future that, you know, if the average person stays in role for about 3 years as an executive, you're never going to get to something that's more than 10 years out. And so it's a balance of standardized and customized, a balance of insight and data, certainly a balance between, you know, yes, there's some very important innovation that's improvement, but there's also, you know, we should really stretch ourselves to think about how big we can be. I think, you know, most conventional traditional management can be accused of probably aiming too low in terms of looking at stuff that they can't necessarily see right at the front of their nose. And then finally, it's an end-to-end solution, which is a real distinction. And I just want to make this clear. We looked at some of the previous schools of innovation that have been kind of very fashionable over the last few decades. Unfortunately, for the most part, most of those different schools were never designed as an end-to-end solution in mind. So we've tried to look at what is an innovator and practitioner's life, and what do they need from beginning, right from the very start, to how do I turn that 3 years after I've launched something great, and how do I turn that into a habit across the company? And so all told, we've got a lot of credibility that we think, you know, we won't be apologetic about. We've worked with a number of clients. We've surfaced all these learnings from a number of future ready organizations, and we've had the great joy of working in more than 50 countries with 25 foresight studies. And so it's turned into something that we know works. And so this is what it will turn into. And so, you know, to the point made by somebody earlier, we're going to take a pause right now and maybe ask the question, maybe have a conversation now, Andrea, just Middle Eastern business and how it gets more innovative. So we're pointing forward, I suppose, and we provided about 8 or 9 different prompts, but we'd love to hear from you in the chat in terms of what is the number one thing that might need to change in the Middle East to facilitate even greater acceleration of innovation. Any thoughts, any projections or bets in terms of where we might be on this one, Andrea?
Let's see. I think I'd like to have people start weighing in on the chat. So if you don't know where the chat is, you know, obviously it's on the bottom, and just type in, that would be great. Because I'd rather hear from the people in the group. One is how to deal with change fatigue, because a lot of change has happened. I think that's really interesting. I think also that I think it was interesting, someone mentioned leadership and was asking the question, is too much of the innovation coming from expats? I think that's really interesting. I know when I was discussing Dubai, for instance, so many companies just sort of put a flag in and said, you know, declared, okay, we're here in Dubai. It's actually very expat heavy when, you know, a few years ago. And then over the course of a few years, I've personally witnessed, and I'm very interested in hearing what people think, a lot of homegrown talent or people returning to build the region and to leverage the assets of the region in new ways. And also, once again, having a long expertise myself in telecommunications and energy, certainly the balance of power has shifted a lot. And I'm very curious what's happening from people's perspectives around innovation in the Middle East.
It's certainly very true of the session we had in Africa, wasn't it, Andrea? I know, you know, we're dealing with probably a region that's probably accelerated itself a little bit further than Africa in terms of innovation, but there may be some parallels there. Certainly, there's a feeling and belief of the people that we had in our African session that we need some homegrown innovation here more than we do people coming in from the outside.
And I also think that the issue of higher empowerment, it is interesting, and I don't mean to be the only woman on the panel here today, but it is interesting to think about some things that are taken for granted in terms of women in the workplace. I know when we work in Tokyo and in Japan, there's not a history of executive leadership with women, and very frequently, I personally will find myself as the only woman on a technology panel. And so I think that, yeah, somebody's just echoing that, this notion of higher empowerment and the acceptance of learning from failure. Certainly from a cultural perspective, I know in Denmark, I said, what's it like, people say in Silicon Valley, fail fast. By the way, Sean and I don't say that. We say learn fast. We say learn fast. But, so they said, what do you think of fail fast? And I said, in your region. And they said, well, if you're a Viking and you fail fast, you'll be dead. You'll have to move out of the country out of embarrassment. You shamed your family. It's not okay. So, yeah, so I'm very interested in that. And thank you very much for the feedback of higher empowerment and the acceptance of learning from failure as something that from a cultural perspective actually is, I think we're sometimes tone deaf, quite frankly, by saying it, because failure is a shaming feeling in a lot of cultures, not just, and so to hear your perspective on the Middle East, that the way of learning from experimentation, learning from new ways, not being able to predict outcomes is, it's all part of this way that you future-proof. Sean?
I think, and it's one, I think, that afflicts nearly every single culture in different ways, right? Like, everybody does seem to feel like, okay, North America reacts the same way as Silicon Valley, and it really doesn't. I think, I think we all react to failure in a few different ways, and as long as you try to mitigate it and try to take the best learning out of it. But certainly culturally, we had somebody speak to our champions group from Denmark the other day, and it was interesting to, I asked him the question, and this is Denmark, you wouldn't think it's totally different than North America. And he was somewhat reticent to write a book about his failure, just because it wasn't as roundly accepted by his peers as it would have been maybe in the bulk of California. So
I'm going to give us, there's just been a recommendation to simplify this. And so let me simplify really quickly. So, and also to make it about you, the community, as opposed to us, our ideas. So thank you for that feedback. So let me give you an example. Imagine that you're sitting here today, and hopefully this is the case, with a hunch. You don't have 100% certainty, but you have a hunch, you have an observation that there is something new that you'd like to take advantage of. It usually starts with, I call it the spidey sense, like from Spider-Man. You kind of get this feeling that things are changing. Certainly COVID's a great example. And so I'll use a COVID example because it's so obvious. So let's imagine that you're that you're the healthcare company, you're a healthcare provider anywhere in the Middle East, and you look at the COVID as an example. And then you think, okay, well, is it about inventing a vaccine? Is it about making partnerships with people who have a vaccine? Is it about distribution? Is it about healthcare policy? Is it about figuring out how to get equity within the distribution of a vaccine? Is it about taking care of local businesses, understanding that the urban landscape is changing tremendously? So whatever it is, I promise you, somebody in this group has had an observation, a spidey sense around COVID, and I'm sure even in every other industry, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's consumer product goods. And so what do you do about that? Well, a non-future-proofed person will go, well, hopefully this will go away. Or an incremental thinker will say, well, let's just fix it a little bit, and maybe it'll get better altogether. But what future-proofing means is that we see this change happening, And then we decide that we have to learn something. What does it take to have a vaccine? Is there a certain temperature? How do we get the refrigeration? How do we keep things stable? How do we get things distributed? Who's the right person making the vaccine? How do we create the right bedfellows, the partners that we trust to provide the vaccine? And then at the same time, what's the logistics? What's the business model for this? If we can't get it to the people, then it's not really going to be effective. And so what we do is we see this new thing, and I use COVID as an example. We learn all we can about the technology, in this case, a vaccine, what makes it stable, what makes it work. We also learn from experimentation, what are the side effects? In this case, it was clinical trials and side effects. And then deciding, at a certain point, leaders, I know Sweden did it really differently than Israel. And so the leaders have to decide what is it that's going to be the greatest good for the greatest number. And then commit means, we're going forward. This is the plan, and we're going to rally around this and get our hearts and our souls into this. So that's what we mean by see, learn, decide, commit. And Sean and I believe that it applies to so many opportunities in so many businesses, whether it's agriculture, you see that soil can be used in a different way. You see that agriculture can be structured a new way. Manufacturing, you see that sensors can be used differently. You see that you can have digital twins. Deciding, committing. And so that's the simple way that we want to empower you to be able to use your intuition and structure it so that you can bring innovation to scale. And hopefully that simplifies an example.
And really, as we've done about 6 or 7 of these from a regional standpoint already, the sweet spot for us, it's great. We're disseminating information to a lot of people, but we love people that put their hand up and go, yeah, you know what? I want to learn more. I want to get involved. And so standardly coming out of these sessions, anywhere from 10 to 15 people from each one of these regions become part of our orbit and start to actually play with the tools that we have. That's the real joy for us. How do we make tangible change and progress? And so 7 things that we're doing overall. We do have this global book tour we're on, and it's almost as much about the movement as it is the book. We're sitting here in the Middle East right now. Next month, we will be with the Nordic countries, and so that will be a completely different experience for us. And later on in the year, we're actually doing future proofing for different type of C-suiters. So if you're a CFO, a CEO, a CIO, we're going to have a session that's global in focus, but is going to be focused on those different 5 or 6 core C-suite functions. And as Andrea mentioned, the first cohort is gone. If we were having this discussion last month, there might be an aperture to get you into our first cohort. We're likely going to be doing our second cohort in September. So both from the standpoint of getting really invested in what we do and learning a ton and learning alongside your peers, certainly there's an opportunity to do that most likely in September, although we haven't announced that day yet. We do these webcasts every single month, and in some respects, it almost writes our book and writes our formula. We do so much effort to get involved and prepared for these sessions. And I know the next session is all about future proofing awards, and I'll ask an explicit ask for people that might be listening to this now. We want to get Middle Eastern nominees into our awards program. We have an April 20th session that, so next Tuesday, 11 o'clock Eastern time, which is probably a little bit late in the game, but probably nighttime in the Middle East. My hope is if there's anybody that can surface 3 companies that they're aware of in the Middle East that deserve some shine to them and some profile, we would love for you to join us as a panelist on this session on the 20th, and we'll eventually announce the award winners on June 23rd. And these are the 20 different categories that we are rewarding or awarding people in. And as well, later on this month, it's usually the last Tuesday of every month, we do a thematic. We're going to surface what are the top 20 new customer wants for 2021. It's an updated version of something that we did back in 2019. So it'll be interesting to see where we end up on that. Please join us for that. We do these foresight ventures, and typically we go out globally. So we find people in each one of the 6 different regions. We had talked about the emerging 30 technologies earlier this year. We're doing customer needs. Like our kickoff is April 27th, but we're investing in that. And we'll be doing some stuff around the future of work and AI and humans. I'll let something out of the book here that our number one technology that we identified for this decade moving forward was augmented intelligence, which really speaks to, at least for the next 10 to 15 years, AI isn't taking over humans. It's actually trying, or at least in a hopeful way, trying to work alongside humans. And the last two things we have here, every month we have what's called the Champions program. We're having our next one, I believe, on May 18th. And so join us. Just come to Futureproofing 66 and tell us that you want to be in our front row, and we will get you into the front door. And then finally, we've talked about these salons in terms of if you have something burning inside your company that go, wow, these guys at Futureproofing really are doing some interesting stuff, and we're about to kick something off, or we're about to have an executive briefing that may change the direction of your company. We're really interested in creating some partnerships and leveraging some co-creation with you. So please get in touch with us. And we've got a place on our website called Our Solutions that can make sense of it all for you as well. A ton of different keynotes that we've done, and we've ranked them in terms of popularity. And we're also later in the year going to do some activity cards that create some of our tools and do it in a playful kind of interactive way. So I guess there's been a hue and cry for what is the gestalt of what future-proofing is all about and what we're trying to achieve in 2021. Andrea, you want to try to summate it in a paragraph?
I think the biggest thing is that it's a time where all of us have had wake-up calls. And if we could have engineered a better time, I don't think we could have possibly engineered a better time for people to need some new tools. It's been a really rough year. I don't know if everybody here is feeling that, but it's been really rough. And around the world, there's just a lot of human connection that's been missed, a lot of fear, a lot of health issues, a lot of, economic struggles. And it's also really interesting that at the same time, there's the most amount of optimism, hope, and connection that we've ever felt. And Sean and I have noticed that the world has gone very, very local. I feel like for the first time, I know my grocer. I didn't used to know my grocer's name or anything else, but it's also very, very global. And so experiences like this, I mean, we've had a chance to make new friends, hopefully here today as well, in global areas that maybe we couldn't have gotten on a plane and gotten around the world as well as we have, Sean. So I think that this is just a time for us to all understand that the power of our own leadership, especially in our companies, in our businesses, with our families, with the societies where we live, we all have to learn how to future-proof. And I feel like, maybe if we had come out with the book a year ago, it would have been more dazzling. Right now, it's very human. We as leaders want to have the right tools for this moment so that we can let business do the great stuff that business is intended to do, which is to serve society and make life better. And I think it's just a wonderful time for us to meet you. And we're hoping that after this, you can join us and be part of the movement.
I think I like your what you had to say there, Andrew, in terms of the humanness of what we've all gone through and some reappraisal, and also just I think a broader view of what innovation really needs to be. Like if we ask the tough societal question in terms of what innovation should be, I think we might have had a very different answer. If you go to our Medium channel, I actually did a 400-year evaluation of how innovation has changed over time. And I think moving forward, we're in a situation right now where I think purpose and societal need and more than just bottom line, probably more triple bottom line or even larger than that is important. I will say this, though, if you're out there as a change agent, and I know we invited a lot of chief innovation officers and people that are in charge of the change agenda of your companies, I was struck by something that sometimes you read studies and you go, whoa, that has stopping power. And so Chamber of Commerce did a study and they asked CEOs of 18 different considerations, what is the most important thing that you have on your mind now to get right? And in order, they said, we need to seriously relook at our business models. Then they said, we need to innovate better. We need to be more successful at what we're doing. We need to be faster at it. And then the third thing they said is we need to digitally transform our companies. We have seen the sophistication of our audience and technologies that are coming at us, and we're going to be out of business if we don't do that. And so if I think about what is in the domain of a lot of people that are probably listening to this session today, those are the three things. And this is no longer on the let's talk about it at the end of the meeting slate for senior executives. This is the core of your operations now. And my hope is between ourselves, between the conversations that we're having, we can create some valuable experience and some valuable insight to help you tackle those challenges. And so we are coming up with a set of stats and evidence. We do this once every so often. It's almost like an Olympic cycle. Every 4 years, we tumble together the best stats and insights and perspective. We put them into, in this case, our See, Learn, Decide, Commit collections. And so certainly as we do those, we're not going to make these fully public. But for the people that have joined us today, we have your information and data. We will definitely get these out to you as a freebie for having joined us today. And then Andrea's favorite phrase, I think it's one of your favorite phrases, top 3 at least, Andrea. Catch up, don't give up. We like John Legend, Future started yesterday and we're already late, and it's so true. And so please, if you want to get in touch with us at all, feel comfortable to get in touch with us at hello@Futureproofing Next. And we'd love to hear from you in terms of what your world is and how we can make some sense of it. Andrea?
Well, we'll be doing an official stop in just a second. Sean will do that. And then we invite you we can promote you to a speaker, to chatting with us. And we'd love for you to stay after hours and see your faces and meet you and hear your ideas. So thank you so much. And Sean?
Yeah, so for the people that are listening to this, thank you. We have brought it. This is the latest we've ever gone into the night, I think, in terms of doing one of these, Andrew. There may be other ones that we've scheduled. It's funny, when you schedule these things at the start of the year, we don't realize that April 13th just looks like a date in the future that will just grin and bear it. But today it's here. We're bringing it. We're bringing our energy and our passion because we love what we do. And so with no further ado, we'll break for our after hours here. But I want to thank people that have joined us today, and I want to thank the people that are watching this. My hope is you benefit, and please do get in touch with us. Say a few nice words, or just ask us questions. We'd love it. So until we see you in the future, it's bye from me and Andrea.
And I am now promoting people to panelists if they want to stay.
Should we pause recording now, Andrea?
Yeah, but I mean, I will in a second. I know how to do it on
Gotcha.
Post-production. Actually, you can pause it.